So hey guys, let's get back to this hydrant project and get things wrapped up. I'm just tired of this thing hanging over my head and I'm ready to move on. So in the very first video, what we ended up doing is installing a shutoff valve. There was a couple reasons for this. One is so we could cut the water off directly to our hydrant while still keeping water on in our house. The other reason for this is so we could let the ground dry out a little bit before we dive into this project. I was thinking we were going to have to dig it in the ground a little bit, and wasn't really quite sure of the piping that was going to be down below, if it was going to be something flexible that we could lift up, or if the ground was so saturated and that pipe was stuck underwater, we'd have to go out and run a trash pump and pump that water out. So I wasn't really sure what we were up against and wanted things to dry out. So after that, we tried to install a repair kit just because this was the easiest fix to get put into place, but unfortunately that ended up not solving the problem. So we had to pull out the shovel and get to work and start digging. Unfortunately, we did have a little bit of rain that moved in right after I got the hole dug down to the bottom of the hydrant, which is around 5 feet. Ended up filling in with water, things caved in a little bit. Was really trying to reduce the size of this hole just because I was shoveling it all by hand. After I got the hydrant pulled up, it became pretty apparent what the problem was. It looked like it was the 90 degree. There was a little hole sitting in there. And then taking a closer look at that 90 degree that connected the water line to the yard hydrant, I realized it was a galvanized fitting. Whoever installed a lot of the plumbing in our place, for some reason they thought it was a good idea to put a bunch of galvanized fittings down there. And I see a lot of people do that. But I'm really against that because, I mean, galvanized steel, I mean, it's steel, but all it does is it's either sprayed or dipped in zinc coating. And that coating wears off over time and will rust out. So especially if you have a high water table, the lifespan of these things is not very long. We had a very similar issue to this a couple years ago with our well, where our well started leaking down below the ground, and sure enough, it was a galvanized fit and rotting away. So I decided to climb in the car and head down to the local store, and just looking at the parts there, I could get another galvanized fitting for $2, or for a couple of dollars more, coming in around $6 or $7, I could get a brass fitting. So it's something that's not going to rot away at all, and should be there for a long time. Much better solution by far than a galvanized fitting. That one will work?
Yep. This one's what we need right here. Who needs the gym? You just need to go to Menards.
So I end up installing the 90 degree street elbow brass fitting in there. One thing I do want to make note is you always want to make sure when you're dealing with these plumbing projects to either use a Teflon tape or a plumber's putty when connecting these two pieces together. So before I ended up putting this hydrant back into place, what I ended up doing is double checking to make sure the hole hadn't filled in at all. So my drain port was going to sit below my frost line, which is at 5 feet. And then I also had my wife cut the water on and just made sure I checked things over so that there was no leaks. You might be wondering why the hydrant is running through a 5-gallon bucket. This is something I wish I would have gone back and redesigned a little bit. But really what it's there for is to protect or space around that drain port or that weep hole on the hydrant. So when you shut the water off and the water drains back down the pipe and out that weep hole, it's got a place to go. So I filled that in with a bunch of gravel rock. I think if I were to redesign this, I probably would have took a 5-gallon bucket instead of have it sitting upside down. Have it just sit down there in the bottom of the hole, filled it up with the gravel with the hydrant sitting in there, and have some sort of lid that just unsnapped, just so it was a little bit more serviceable. So one thing I did end up removing was the heat tape that was on there. In the 6 years that we've lived out here, I think we've only plugged it in 2 or 3 times, and that was when we were in the extreme cold temps of some pretty nasty winters, like negative 30, 40 degree temps. So I think the big takeaway here is make sure you use brass fittings when you're working underground. It does cost you a couple extra dollars, but if you're having to dig things back up, this hydrant's been in place for about 10 years, which is really not all that long, and I don't want to be digging this up in another 8 to 10 years again to replace that. So hopefully this information was helpful for someone out there, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.